Okay, so let me read the back of this wonderful book to you. Then I'm going to give you my notes and a little bit of the book I have marked, not much, and a rating. So, fall in love with the first book in Debbie Macomber's Deliverance Company series featuring a romance between a mercenary and a widow, inexplicably drawn together. Kane McClellan had chosen his lifestyle. He thrived on the challenge, the rush that came from with his putting his life in incredible danger. No woman, he told himself, could ever make him feel the way that it did to have a successful mission, no matter how beautiful she was. So why was he standing on a cold pier like a lovelorn teenager hoping for a glimpse of Lynette Collins? But then he saw her, and the sight of her took his breath away, and the wind whipped his luscious. Or sorry, sorry, I'm tired. The wind whipped her luscious dark hair about her face, and she lifted a finger to wrap a thick strand behind her ear. The smart thing to do was turn around and walk away as fast as his feet would carry him. He'd gotten what he wanted, one last look at her. His curiosity should be satisfied. But even as his mind formulated the thought, Kane knew just seeing Lynette again could never be enough. This book has a little bit of everything. If you want action, adventure, life and death, love and tragedy, get this book. It covers love so deep, so tragic, in so many aspects of life-altering choices, all in one book. Lynette had lost her first husband due to illness. And Kane, well, he loved his job. It was his life. Fate had other intentions due to Lynette's former sister-in-law, Nancy, and Kane's good friend from high school. Both had been local football heroes, and Kane was the quarterback, and Rob was his favorite wide receiver. Following graduation, Kane gone into the military, and Rob, well, he went to college, and they talked a couple of times in the years that passed, and a card at Christmas and a few lines, but that was mainly the extent of it. Their relationship. Oh, it says, Donna, go to the book. Okay, so we're going to go to the book now on the pages that I have marked. Okay, page 9. Since Kane was in San Francisco getting Malloy set up on rehabilitation program for his hip and knee, it only made sense to catch up with his longtime buddy. In a moment of goodwill and all right weakness, Kane had agreed to drop in on the Christmas party. He was uncomfortable in crowds. He never had been one to exhibit many of more refined social graces. He felt out of place here. Sipping his Jack Daniels, he returned his gaze to the woman who had garnered his attention earlier. Why not? He decided. He stepped around the sofa. It was Christmas, and it had been a good long while since he felt strongly attracted to a woman. He wove his way between couples who were attempting to sing a favorite Christmas carol in German and failing miserably. They seemed to be enjoying themselves, and Kane found them amusing. A half hour, Kane said, slipping next to her. She stood close to the fireplace, holding the fluted champagne glass in both hands. A half hour, she repeated, gazing at him with wide brown eyes, doe eyes, big and trusting and sincere. That's how you decided you would wait before you quietly left. Her gaze widened. How did you know? That whiskey burned the back of his throat, because that's how long I decided to wait before I leave. She smiled then, and he was amazed at that transformation. The simple action brought her to her delicate features. It was as if the sun had peeked from behind the thick dark clouds, spilling sunshine. Her eyes brightened and her lips quivered softly. I'm Kane McClellan, he said, holding out his hand to her. Lynette Collins. Hello, Lynette. The name sounded vaguely familiar, and frowned in an effort to remember where he heard it. Possibly from Rob, who attempted to match him up for the evening. You don't work with Rob, do you? Her attention drifted to his hair, and he realized the high and tight military cut told her he probably was not a stockbroker. Rob and I are longtime friends, he answered without elaborating. What about you? Nancy and Rob are my brother and sister-in-law. You're married? His gaze shot to her left hand. Her ring finger was bare, but the indentation of a wedding band was certainly visible. It was then that Kane remembered where he had heard the name. Rob had mentioned Nancy's brother had passed away a couple of years earlier and suggested Kane meet the widow. He declined. My husband died, she explained unnecessarily. Kane felt a sudden need for another drink. He clinked his ice against the side of the glass and stared at the melting cubes. Can I get you anything? He asked, gesturing toward the bar. Lynette set aside her empty champagne glass. Nothing, thanks. Kane left her and headed across the room. He wanted to kick himself for being so inept. It was apparent that she was ill at ease. Perhaps she wanted to talk about her late husband and had been looking for a willing ear. It didn't matter, because the moment she announced she was a widow, he'd grown so uncomfortable that he made an excuse to leave her. The thing was, he hadn't known what to say. That he was sorry, that sounded even phony to him. He never even met the man. Circumstances such as these made him regret not leaving for Montana at the first opportunity. Instead, he lollygagged around San Francisco, looking up old friends and making a fool of himself. When Kane had a fresh drink, he turned and discovered Lynette hadn't left the party. He was pleased that she stayed. He hadn't wanted their conversation to end abruptly, but he wasn't sure what more he had to say either. He studied the bright red stockings hanging from the fireplace mantel, casually walked back to her side. Her gentle smile reached out to greet him. "Something amuses you." "Nancy," she responded, which no answer was needed whatsoever. He looked around for Rob's wife, not finding her. "She mentioned you," Lynette elaborated. "I just realized that you were the one she wanted me to meet. Rob tried to line me up with you as well. Nancy did this whole song and dance about it being 2 years since Michael, and that was this old school buddy of Rob's who was in town." Kane grinned, thinking it was a good long while since he had no reason to smile about anything. "I guess we showed them." "I guess we did." Lynette laughed softly and waved her hand in front of her face. "Is it hot in here, or is it just me?" Standing in front of the softly flickering fire had something to do with why she was uncomfortably warm, but Kane didn't mention that. Instead, he took her by the elbow and guided her outside to a small balcony that overlooked San Francisco Bay. The lights of the Golden Gate Bridge outlined the well-known landmark, illuminating the skyline in a postcard-perfect silhouette. A cool breeze drifted off the water, and the sky was crowded with stars and seemed determined to dazzle them with their brilliance. Lynette gripped the hold of the balcony railing with both hands, closed her eyes, and tilted her head upward. When she exhaled, her shoulders sagged appreciatively. "Nancy said something about you being out of the country a lot of the time. That must be hard." "It's my job," he said. "You don't miss home?" In the last year he hadn't thought about that ranch enough to miss it, nor had he hurried to Montana when the opportunity arose. He was a man without ties, without roots. That was the way it had to be. "I'm too busy to think about it," he answered after a moment, and looked at her, wanting to divert the subject away from himself. "Do you work?" She nodded. "I own a yarn store called Wild and Woolly on Pier 39. A knitting shop. It fit. He could easily picture Lynette snuggled up in a rocking chair next to the fireplace, her long needles clicking softly as she expertly wove the yarn. He found the image inviting, as if she asked him to cozy up next to her. Kane wished he could pinpoint what it was about Lynette that conjured up fantasies of domestic bliss. Homespun women didn't generally appeal to him. It was the season, he decided, when goodwill toward men flourished and a man's thought turned to hearth and home. Christmas time seemed to bring out the best in people, himself included, he reasoned, willing to actually accept the explanation. "Would you care to dance?" Lynette asked him. "Dance? Me?" Her invitation flustered him. He flattened his hand against his chest as the excuse worked their way up to the throat. "I'm not much good at this sort of thing," he managed after an awkward moment. "Me either, but we don't need to worry about making fools of ourselves out here." She held up her arms, and before a second protest could form, she was in his embrace. He tensed, but she didn't seem to notice. Tucking her head under his chin, she hummed along with the music, and gradually he relaxed. Their feet made short, awkward, shuffling movements until Kane realized there was actually some kind of rhythm to their movements. The tension eased from the limbs, and he pressed his chin against her temple. She smelled of wildflowers and sunshine. He never held anyone more incredibly soft, so soft that she frightened him. He absorbed her gentleness the way a thirsty sponge did water. With her in his arms, he could close his eyes and not see the mangled bodies of men who died at his hand. With her he heard the soft strains of the joyous music instead of the screams of dying bitter men as they cursed him on their way to HE double hockey sticks. His grip tightened and she trembled, pulling her flesh against him. He felt her breath moisten the column of his neck. Kane closed his eyes and savored the feel of a woman in his arms. Lynette clung to him too. He realized gratefully that her hold on him was as tight as it was on his. He knew what was happening. He could spend a few hours with this woman who was lovely, pure, and forget who and what he was. He could relish her softness and ignore the bitterness of truth and hard life that he had chosen. All this wasn't one-sided. Lynette couldn't hold him and forget the man that she loved and lost. He was her haven, just as she had become his. As much as they liked to deny it, Kane needed this woman's touch. He was desperate for her gentleness. His heart, perhaps even needed his soul, needed the time with this woman. The music ceased, but he kept moving. It felt good to have her in his arms. Lynette broke away from him, and for an instant he resisted tightening the grip until he realized what he was doing. Irritated with himself, he dropped his arms and stepped back. Lynette Collins made him weak, and that was something he couldn't allow. "Thank you," she said softly. She didn't need to say it. It had been a long time since anyone had held her, he knew. This wasn't the kind of woman who bed-hopped. She deeply grieved with the loss of her husband, and Kane also had grieved alone without seeking the solace of a lover. In one way, Kane envied her husband. There would be no one to mourn his passing, no one to stand over his cemetery plot and weep. That was the life he had chosen, the way it had to be. There was no room for gentleness, not now, not ever. Not if he planned to survive, and he did. For what? The question came at him like a pinpoint beam of a laser slicing through his mind. All at once he hadn't a clue why he found it so important to stay alive. He had no immediate family, no heirs. As far as that went, he could retire now, and it would take 2 lifetimes to spend what he accumulated in the last several years with the Deliverance Company. By tacit agreement, he and Lynette wandered back to the party, in which seemed to be full swing. Without a word, they went their separate ways, which was for the best, Kane reasoned. Lynette was a sweet thing and deserved happiness. It wasn't likely that she would find that with him. By nipping this attraction in the bud, he was doing her a kindness. Kane caught sight of Nancy and Rob dancing on the other side of the room. Small clusters of groups were involved, chit-chat, something at which he felt completely inept. With little more than a backward glance, he retrieved his coat and left. Later he'd send Rob and Nancy a Christmas card and thank him for the party. He was half tempted to mention meeting Lynette, then he decided against it. In the hallway outside, waiting for the elevator, he sensed someone approach. It shouldn't have surprised him to find it was Lynette rounding the corner. But it did. She seemed startled as well, and her round eyes even widened. "So we meet again," he said. When the elevator arrived, they stepped aboard together, and he pushed the button for the lobby. Stepping back, he studied the woman who stood beside him. Within a matter of seconds, they would go back to their separate lives. Kane experienced a sense of desperation that was foreign to him. Even worse, he felt like a world-class fool. If Mallory knew what he was thinking, or Murphy, or Bailey, Jack, or either, they'd lock him up without this bout of insanity had passed. Men like Kane simply did not become involved with women like Lynette Collins. On the ground floor, Kane watched Lynette hurry across the street and climb inside her car. He stood, rooted, unwilling, and unable to move as her Toyota turned the corner and disappeared from sight. After a moment, he drew in a deep breath and headed toward the rental car he picked up at the airport there 3 days earlier. His name was Kane, and right then he felt aptly christened. His namesake had been the son of Adam and Eve, the first child born outside the gates of paradise. Their relationship has a lot of ups and downs, even moments of where she tries to move on past Kane, only for fate to say no, and when it's meant to be, it will be. There's another powerful relationship in this book, Tim Mallory and Francine Holden. Tim needs rehab, and thanks to Kane, he gets the rehab he needs. He hires Francine, who is a no-nonsense physical therapist. Kane is friends with Tim, and of course Tim and Kane work for that Deliverance Company together. While Kane leaves his friend Tim in the care of the physical therapist, Tim is cantankerous and puts Francine through a nightmare of a patient. However, time passes and Tim grows quite fond of his strict, by-the-book physical therapist, Francine. And Tim constantly wants to be intimate with Francine and even apologizes for his bad behavior time and time again. But to find out more, I'm going to leave you with 4 burning questions before I give you a rating. Will the job of being a mercenary be more important than love, not only for Kane, but for Tim? Will the loss of one love never allow Lynette to fully love any man, even Kane? Will Francine Holden, who's the physical therapist, be able to let go of some of her insecurities, I call them insecurities, you may not, and be able to love Tim and be able to trust that he isn't going to leave her? Will Tim have his way and leave Francine alone with a broken heart? Will Cain decide at one of these junctures after being reunited with Lynette that, hey, maybe this is meant to be? What does fate have in store for these couples? There's only one way to find out, because I'm not sharing another moment with you. You got to read the whole book, and the rating is a 9. So that's pretty high. So for the book that caught my attention, with a cabin that looked like Rip, with a song that was one of my favorite country music songs, which it really brings it home in this book, Someday Soon. The two women, are they going to wait for someday soon, or is someday soon simply never going to come? And with that Montana background, you've got to read this book. Just saying, you've got to read this book. Pick it up today. I have moved on now, reading my new Maisie Yates book, The Heartbreaker of Echo Pass. And I am already up to chapter 9, and it's that good. I have been dying for this story to be told of Iris. She was one of the I believe she's the last sister in this series, and she was so she was the caregiver of the family, and now it's like, oops, what the heck was that? I dropped something. Sorry. She was like, always had her defenses up and saying that she was never going to fall in love. She's not going to find love. Well, lo and behold, she wants to follow her dreams, but in order to follow her dreams, she's wanting to open a bakery, and the man who has the very building that she wants to go bake at, she has to barter with him in order to get that, because he has a very high rent set on that building. She gets her way by doing some cooking, cleaning, and every day around the cabin work for this man that is more like a hermit, if you will. And they both have their own skeletons from their past. But are they going to overcome it and find love? We got to find out. Stay tuned for the book. As always, I always say love exists in books and movies, but not in real life. That's for stuff made of movies and TV series. I love you all. Thank you for tuning in. God bless, and I hope to see you again soon.